Finally, I'm rid of that baggage. Starting today, my parents are moving in with me at my house. As soon as my parents passed away, my husband Mike, having demolished our family home, stood in front of its site and blurted this out to me, standing there in shock. "What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? Hurry up and bring the inheritance to our place." At his words, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. So that's what this was all about. I realized. What? Why are you laughing? Don't you guys know what you're talking about? Mike and my in-laws looked at me quizzically as I laughed. It was then that I told them the truth. My name is Misery Nathaniel. I was born the eldest daughter to ordinary office worker parents. I have one brother, a very normal family. I married Mike when I was 29, and we had 2 kids. Juggling work and parenting, I suddenly found myself at 55. My son Sean and daughter Amelia had grown up to be fine adults, each living on their own and struggling with their new careers. Now was the time to relax with my husband. It was an ordinary life, but I was happy. I thought I would continue to age like this. But my mundane life changed one winter day. My father was in a car accident and suddenly passed away. He was only 72 at the time. Our whole family was engulfed in grief, especially my mother, who was so depressed she couldn't even eat. "Mom, I know it's hard, but you have to eat," I told her time and time again. "I know, but I just don't have the appetite." "It feels like there's something stuck in my chest," she would reply. My brother and I thought she was just emotionally distressed and watched her for a while. However, she rapidly lost weight. In just half a month, worried, I took her to the hospital. Cancer. The diagnosis from the doctor left me in shock. The cancer was advanced, and surgery wasn't an option. With about a year left to live, I hadn't had the chance to really take care of my parents yet. Just when I thought I had lost my father, now my mother too was facing this. I was even more devastated than when my father passed, but I didn't have the luxury of grieving forever. My brother lived far away and couldn't be relied upon, so it was up to me to take care of my mother. I immediately told Mike that I wanted to live with my mother. My day started early and ended late, as I took on the role of caregiver for my mother. Waking before dawn, I'd tiptoe through the quiet house, careful not to disturb Mike, who, despite his reluctance to help, at least maintained his silence in these early hours. The first task was always to prepare a light breakfast for my mother, something nutritious yet easy to digest. I became adept at crafting meals that were both appealing and health-conscious, given her frail state. After breakfast, I would help her with her morning routine, which involved a myriad of medications that needed to be taken at specific times. The labels on the bottles became a familiar sight, and I meticulously tracked each dosage, ensuring nothing was missed. Her gratitude was evident in her weak smiles and gentle pats on my hand, a silent communication of her appreciation. The rest of the morning would pass in a blur of chores and care. Cleaning the house had fallen entirely on my shoulders, and while it was physically exhausting, there was a therapeutic rhythm to it, sweeping, dusting, doing the laundry, that provided a sense of normalcy amidst the upheaval. In between, I would check on my mother, adjusting pillows, chatting about memories, or simply sitting with her, holding her hand while she rested. Afternoons were a repeat of the morning's tasks, punctuated by lunch preparations. I tried to keep our meals varied and interesting, a small daily challenge that brought a hint of creativity to my otherwise routine-filled days. Sometimes, I would open the windows to let in the fresh air and the sound of neighborhood life, children playing, birds chirping, which seemed to lift her spirits, if only just a bit. Despite the demanding schedule, the physical proximity to my mother allowed for moments of heartfelt conversation and sharing. We revisited old stories, laughed over past family events, and sometimes, delved into more serious discussions about what was to come. It was during these conversations that I felt the weight of our situation most acutely, yet also drew strength from our bond. Evenings brought their own set of challenges as fatigue from the day set in. Preparing dinner, helping my mother get ready for bed, and ensuring the house was locked and secure for the night often left me drained. But every night, as I finally sat down to catch my breath, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Despite Mike's distant attitude and the physical toll it took on me, being there for my mother in her time of need was a decision I never regretted. During those moments, sitting apart from Mike at the funeral, a surge of loneliness washed over me. I had always envisioned a partner who would stand by me through both joy and grief, yet here I was, feeling isolated in a crowd of mourners. This stark reality stung sharply, contrasting deeply with the support and presence of my brother and his family, who were pillars of strength during such a somber time. As the whispers of distant relatives grew louder, hinting at discord between Mike and me, I couldn't help but feel the weight of their speculations adding to the already heavy atmosphere. It wasn't just about sitting together, it was a symbol of unity that Mike seemed indifferent to. Despite the pain and the sense of betrayal that gnawed at me, I found myself defending him in low whispers, brushing off the gossip with half-hearted explanations that even I didn't fully believe. Returning home after the funeral was another ordeal. The house felt emptier without my mother's presence, and the silence was a stark reminder of her absence. Mike's behavior hadn't improved. If anything, it seemed as though he was relieved that the obligations tied to my mother were now behind us. This realization only deepened the rift between us, making our conversations more strained and infrequent. In the weeks that followed, I tried to find solace in routine, busying myself with work and home life, attempting to mask the growing void within. Yet, every evening as I sat across from Mike at dinner, the space between us felt like a chasm. His continued detachment was a bitter pill to swallow, and I found myself longing for the companionship and empathy that were glaringly absent. The emotional toll of nursing my mother, coupled with Mike's indifference, left me exhausted and resentful. I missed the camaraderie and support that a spouse is supposed to provide. My thoughts often wandered to the possibility of seeking comfort elsewhere, perhaps in friends or a support group, anyone who could offer a listening ear and a shoulder to lean on. As days turned into weeks, I grappled with the decision of what to do about my marriage. The indifference from Mike, which was stark during my mother's illness and even more so in the aftermath, was slowly eroding the foundations of our relationship. The future seemed uncertain, and I knew that some hard decisions lay ahead. Nonetheless, I resolved to take it one day at a time, focusing on healing myself and finding peace amidst the turmoil. My heart sank as I stood there, the words from my in-laws echoing in my ears, each syllable a piercing reminder of their callousness. It was not just the purse, a mere object, it was the blatant disregard for the sentimental value it held for me. My mother had carried that purse almost every day, and each detail, from the worn leather to the small keychain she adored, brought back a flood of memories. I hesitated, my voice barely a whisper. Actually, I was thinking of keeping it myself. It reminds me of her. My mother-in-law's face twisted into a semblance of disappointment, masked poorly by a condescending smile. "Oh, I see. Well, if you change your mind, let me know," she said, placing the purse back on the counter with less care than she ought to have shown. After they left the room, the silence felt oppressive. I stood alone, the events of the past few hours replaying in my mind. The insensitivity, the laughter at my expense, it all circled around me like a relentless storm. I realized that this pattern wasn't new, it was merely the culmination of years of subtle digs and overt insults. Feeling the walls closing in, I slipped outside for a breath of fresh air. The cool breeze was a small comfort against the turmoil inside. I leaned against the porch railing, my thoughts racing. The realization that my marital home had never truly been a sanctuary hit me hard. It had always been a battlefield of sorts, where I fought to maintain my dignity and sanity against constant belittlement. As I stood there, the night growing deeper, I contemplated the vast gulf between the life I had envisioned with Mike and the stark reality I was living. The disconnect between us had grown too wide to bridge with mere patience and understanding. It was clear that what I needed wasn't just space, but a reevaluation of our entire relationship. Determined not to let this night of revelation go to waste, I made a mental note to seek counsel. Perhaps a therapist could help me navigate these troubled waters, or maybe it was time to confide in a close friend who could offer a fresh perspective. What was evident was that the status quo was no longer sustainable. I needed to make changes, not just for my peace of mind, but for my well-being. The night air grew chilly, and I wrapped my arms around myself, drawing comfort from the small act. Tomorrow would be soon enough to start making decisions. For now, the quiet of the night was a balm, soothing the raw edges of my frayed emotions. As I turned to go back inside, I felt a small, defiant spark kindle within me, a promise of resistance against the disregard I had faced for too long. The moment Mike handed me the travel vouchers, a mix of emotions swelled within me. Relief, hope, and a lingering sense of betrayal jostled for space in my heart. I wiped the tears from my cheeks, trying to make sense of his gesture. Was this his way of making amends, or merely an attempt to ease his guilt? The thought nagged at me, but I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the practicalities of his offer. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice shaky. "This means a lot, really. The kids will be excited." I tried to keep my tone neutral, to not let on how deeply conflicted I felt. Mike nodded, his expression unreadable. He seemed distant, yet there was a hint of genuine concern in his eyes, a look I hadn't seen in a long time. As he walked past me to head into the kitchen, I stood there, the vouchers in hand, contemplating the possibilities. A trip could indeed be the fresh start we needed, a chance to step away from the tensions and the painful memories that had accumulated like so much dust in the corners of our home. Perhaps it would also give me the space to think about everything that had happened, to decide on the future of our relationship with some clarity. Later, as I discussed the trip with the kids, their excitement was infectious. They chattered about where we could go, what we would see, and the adventures we'd have. Seeing their faces light up, I felt a warmth that had been missing for a while. It was a bittersweet realization, this trip, prompted by such turmoil, might just be what we needed to mend, at least partially, the fractures within our family. In the days leading up to our departure, I found myself packing not just clothes and essentials, but also a bundle of mixed feelings. There was anticipation, certainly, but also apprehension about what awaited us upon our return. Would this trip be a mere band-aid, a temporary fix? Or could it truly be the catalyst for a deeper healing? The night before we were set to leave, I sat down alone in the living room, the house quiet around me. I thought about Mike, about us. The trip was a gesture, yes, but the road to reconciliation, should we choose to walk it, would be long and undoubtedly difficult. Yet, as I turned the travel vouchers over in my hands, I realized that perhaps this was also an opportunity to start anew, not just in location but in understanding and, hopefully, in forgiveness. As the moonlight streamed through the window, casting gentle patterns on the floor, I felt a cautious optimism begin to take root. Maybe, just maybe, this journey would lead us back to each other. The ground beneath me felt like it was crumbling, much like the family home that was now just a memory. As I stood there, staring at the empty lot where my childhood had unfolded and my parents had lived out their last days, the betrayal cut deep. Mike's words echoed in my ears, his intent clear and cruel. It wasn't just about the inheritance or the house, it was the sheer disregard for any sentiment I held dear. My mind raced as I tried to comprehend the full extent of what had happened. How could he? How did he even manage this without my knowledge? Legalities, documents, permissions, my thoughts were a tangled mess of confusion and anger. Mike and his parents just watched, their smiles wide, enjoying the shock on my face. It was a scene so surreal, it took my breath away. "Mike, how could you do this?" After everything, my voice broke, the hurt overwhelming. But Mike just shrugged, a cold, detached expression on his face. "It's done, misery. It's better this way. We need a fresh start, and this," he gestured to the empty space, "was necessary. Bring whatever is left from your parents' things to our place. It's time you fully joined my family now." The audacity of his words was staggering. This wasn't just a breach of trust, it was a calculated move to erase my past and force me into a life where only his wants and needs mattered. I felt a rising panic, but also a growing resolve. This was not a situation I could let stand, not just for my sake, but for the respect and memory of my parents. "I won't be bringing anything," I said firmly, my voice steadier than I felt. And I won't be moving in with you. This is unforgivable, Mike. His expression hardened, the faux affability disappearing. You don't have a choice. Everything you had is gone. You're nothing without me. That stung, but it also ignited something within me, a fierce determination to prove him wrong, to reclaim my independence. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the emotional storm. I will always have a choice, Mike. And I choose not to be part of this deceit any longer. Turning away from him and his gloating parents, I walked back to my car, the fragments of my shattered heart sharp in my chest. The drive away from what was once my sanctuary was one of the hardest things I had ever done. Tears blurred my vision, not just for the loss of the physical structure, but for the end of what I had believed my marriage was. As I drove, I thought about the next steps. Legal counsel, staying with friends, rebuilding, it all lay ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of something that had been dampened for too long, hope. Hope that beyond the betrayal, a new beginning could be forged, one where I was no longer overshadowed by someone else's cruel designs. The lawyer's office became a sanctuary of sorts in the following days, a place where the chaos of my life was distilled into something resembling order. Each meeting provided clearer steps on how to address the illegal demolition and betrayal I had experienced. The lawyer, a kind yet sharply intelligent woman, meticulously laid out the legal repercussions Mike and his father faced for their actions. It was a complicated case, but she was optimistic about the potential for significant legal recourse. Demolishing a property without proper permits and consent, especially one not in their name, is a serious offense, she explained, her tone firm yet reassuring. There are laws protecting property rights, and based on the details you've provided, we can pursue charges of destruction of property and possibly fraud, given the deceptive way they managed to send you away. The thought of taking legal action was daunting. The legal system was a realm I had hoped never to need to navigate in such a personal capacity. Yet, here I was, discussing terms like civil suits and restitution. My initial fear gradually morphed into determination. This wasn't just about the house or the inheritance, they had tried to strip me of my dignity and my past. I couldn't let that stand. We'll need to gather evidence and possibly get statements from the company that rented out the demolition equipment, the lawyer continued. I'll handle the inquiries there. Meanwhile, it would help if you could gather any documents related to the property and any correspondence with Mike or his parents that might illustrate their intent. As I left her office, a plan forming in my mind, the weight of my initial despair began to lift slightly. There was a long road ahead, no doubt filled with challenges and possibly painful revelations, but the thought of holding Mike and his parents accountable offered a sliver of solace. Over the next few days, I stayed with a close friend who offered not just a spare room but a listening ear and unwavering support. In her company, I found moments of peace amidst the storm. We spent evenings poring over old photos and documents I had saved, some of which proved to be crucial in building the case. Each piece of evidence I found felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of the truth from the web of lies Mike had woven. It was during one of these evenings that my friend gently reminded me, this isn't just about winning a case, but about finding your way back to yourself after all this betrayal. Her words struck a chord. While the legal battle was necessary, it was also crucial for me to rebuild the life that had been so abruptly upended. I started to think about after the lawsuit, where I would live, how I would move forward in my relationships, and most importantly, how I would heal. As I lay in bed that night, the moon casting a gentle glow through the window, I realized that the path to recovery would be long and uncertain. Yet, I felt a quiet strength building within me. This ordeal had shown me the worst of what people could do, but it had also reminded me of my resilience. No matter the outcome of the legal proceedings, I was already on my way to reclaiming my life, piece by piece. With each word Mike spoke, trying to justify the unjustifiable, my resolve only hardened. If he's truly sorry, then he'll agree to the settlement, I reiterated firmly, my voice steady, despite the tumult of emotions swirling within me. The audacity of his excuses, attempting to manipulate the situation to make his life easier at the expense of my own home, was astonishing and deeply hurtful. Mike was silent for a long moment on the other end of the phone. I could almost hear him grappling with the reality that I was no longer the passive partner he had taken for granted. I need to talk to my dad about this. I'll call you back, he finally said, a hint of resignation in his tone. The line went dead, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The next few days were a blur of activity. My lawyer prepared for all possible scenarios, from further negotiations to an actual court case if it came to that. I spent long hours discussing details, reviewing documents, and occasionally pausing to reflect on the surreal turn my life had taken. The support from my friends and family during this time was my anchor, providing not just practical help but emotional strength. Finally, Mike called back, his tone subdued. My dad and we've discussed it, and we'll comply with the settlement. We'll pay the damages as outlined in the notice, he said. The words were not accompanied by an apology, the absence of which stung, yet I was not surprised. Mike's pride and his skewed perspectives were too ingrained for a simple change of heart. Thank you for making the right decision, I responded, my voice calm but cold. Please coordinate with my lawyer for the specifics. I expect everything to be handled promptly. As I hung up, a sense of relief washed over me, mingled with sorrow. This victory, if it could be called that, was Pyrrhic. The house was gone, a pile of rubble and memories, and with it, a part of my past. Yet, this was also a beginning, a painful but necessary step towards reclaiming my life and autonomy. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding, both literally and metaphorically. The settlement money would not bring back my family home, but it provided the means to start anew somewhere else, a place where I could make new memories, untainted by betrayal. I started looking at properties, considering each potential new home not just for its walls and windows, but for the fresh start it represented. During this time, I also began to see a therapist, working through the deep-seated feelings of betrayal and upheaval. Each session helped unravel a bit more of the tangled emotions and helped me understand that while the house was a symbol of my past, my true home was something I carried within me, built out of my resilience, my relationships, and my capacity to forgive, if not forget. As I signed the papers for a new house, I felt a cautious optimism about the future. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to face them, knowing I had found strength I never knew I possessed. How can you just smile at a time like this? We know that Mike has been selling Grandma's belongings. It's not just about the items, it's about the memories and the respect owed to her. Mike's mother's smile faltered, her expression turning into a confused frown as she looked between Amelia and me. Selling belongings? Mike, what is this all about? She turned to her son, her tone demanding an explanation. Mike looked cornered, his usual bravado nowhere in sight. Under the combined glare of his wife, daughter, and now his own mother, he finally cracked. Okay. I did list those items, but I was just trying to make some room, and maybe get some money to help with the legal costs. I thought, his voice trailed off under my incredulous stare. You thought what? That you'd further profit from your destruction? I interjected sharply, my anger flaring again at his audacity. These aren't just items to be sold, Mike. They are the last pieces of my mother, memories that you had no right to monetize. Mike's father, who had been silently observing the exchange, finally spoke up, his voice stern. Mike, you've gone too far. You need to make this right. He looked genuinely upset, a sharp contrast to his usual indifference. Encouraged by his father's words, I pressed on, I want every single item back, Mike. Cancel the listings immediately and gather everything you've taken. And this isn't just about the belongings, it's about the trust you've shattered. You need to start making amends, and this is only the first step. Mike nodded, looking defeated and ashamed. I'll get on the app and delete the listings now. I'll gather everything up, nothing has been sold yet, I promise. He pulled out his phone, starting to fumble through the app under our watchful eyes. Amelia, still visibly upset but slightly mollified by the turn of events, stood beside me, her presence a comforting support. "We'll be waiting," she said, her voice firm. As Mike worked on undoing his latest misstep, his mother approached me quietly. "I'm sorry, Misery. I didn't know he'd done something like this. If there's anything else we can do to help fix this mess, please let us know." I nodded, feeling a mix of vindication and deep sadness. The situation was far from resolved, but reclaiming my mother's belongings felt like a small victory in the wake of so much loss. Amelia and I decided to wait there until Mike had rectified his mistake, ensuring that he followed through on his promises. The drive back to Amelia's house was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. The betrayal had cut deep, but today's actions were a step towards healing, a small stitch in the fabric of our frayed relationship. As we pulled into the driveway, I felt a weary sense of hope. The road to recovery was long, but perhaps not impossible. I tried to calm the storm of emotions within me. Mike, being family doesn't excuse the actions taken against me and the memory of my mother. It's about respect, something that's been sorely lacking. My voice was firm, trying to imprint the gravity of the situation upon him. Mike's responses were frantic and disjointed. I know, I'm sorry, it's just everything's gotten out of hand. I'll talk to my mom, we'll figure this out, I promise. Just, please, think about the good times too." I sighed, feeling a profound sadness. Good times don't erase bad actions, Mike. They don't erase betrayal or theft. You need to make things right. It's not just about apologies, it's about actions. If you're truly sorry, show it. Actions, Mike, not just words. We ended the call, with an uneasy silence hanging between us. As Amelia and I drove back from the police station, I reflected on the whirlwind of events that had upended what I had once thought of as a stable life. My trust in Mike had been shattered, not just by his initial betrayal, but now further by his complacency in his mother's schemes. Upon arriving back at Amelia's place, I sat down with her and discussed our next steps. "We need to ensure that all the items are returned," I told her, "and we must keep pushing for the compensation for the house. It's not just about the money, it's about accountability." Amelia nodded, her earlier anger replaced with a resolute determination. "We'll see it through together," she affirmed. "You're not alone in this, Mom." The following days were filled with logistical challenges. We coordinated with the police to retrieve the sold items from Mike's mother and ensured they were stored securely. We also continued to push the legal proceedings for the compensation Mike owed. Each step was taxing, but necessary to rebuild the sense of security that had been so abruptly destroyed. As I lay in bed each night, the silence of Amelia's guest room was a stark reminder of the upheaval. Yet, there was a strange solace in taking decisive action, in not allowing myself to be victimized any further. With each day, my resolve strengthened, bolstered by Amelia's unwavering support and the small victories we achieved together. Despite the pain, this ordeal was a powerful reminder of my own resilience and the importance of standing up for oneself. It was a lesson in the harsh realities of trust and betrayal, but also in the possibility of recovery and redemption, even when it seemed most unlikely. Upon hearing about the will, my thoughts were conflicted. It was clear that Mike's father had made his plans with particular intentions, perhaps as his way of making amends or preserving some legacy. Yet, the fact that he wanted Sean to inherit the house, despite the recent turmoil, added a layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. I reached out to Sean, curious to hear his thoughts. When we spoke, he was as surprised as I was about the inheritance. "Honestly, I don't know what to do with the house. After everything that's happened, it feels more like a burden than a blessing," Sean confided, his voice heavy with resignation. "You don't have to decide anything right now," I suggested gently. "Take your time. Think about what's best for you and your family. And remember, you're not obligated to accept it if it doesn't feel right." Sean expressed his gratitude for the support, but I could tell he was torn. He had always had a complicated relationship with his grandfather, who had been both a stern figure and a doting patriarch. Now, with the house as a potential inheritance, Sean had to navigate the difficult waters of familial obligations and personal feelings. As for myself, my interactions with Mike had left a sour taste. His father's diagnosis and subsequent passing had been a stark reminder of the fragility of life, and while I felt a profound sadness for the man's suffering, the bitterness of past conflicts couldn't be easily forgotten. Mike's callous remarks during his father's illness, juxtaposed with his panic at the diagnosis, highlighted a hypocrisy that was hard to overlook. In the days following the funeral, as I reflected on the man Mike's father had been, I struggled with mixed emotions. It was difficult to reconcile the harshness of his words with the inevitable empathy one feels towards someone facing mortality. This emotional turmoil was compounded by the ongoing legal battles with Mike, which were far from over despite his father's death. The inheritance became a symbol of unresolved issues, a physical manifestation of the emotional and moral complexities that had defined our relationships. Sean's eventual decision regarding the house would undoubtedly stir these waters even further, but for now, I focused on supporting him as he made his choice. In the quiet moments alone, I contemplated the journey of forgiveness and healing. It wasn't just about the material losses or the betrayals, it was about finding a way to move forward, to build something positive from the ruins of shattered relationships. This process was neither simple nor quick, but it was necessary, not just for peace, but for the closure it would eventually bring. Moving in with Sean and his fiancée felt like a fresh start, a chance to create a new chapter in my life after so much turmoil. Their warm welcome eased the transition, and as I packed up my things at Amelia's house, I felt a mixture of excitement and relief. Amelia had been incredible throughout everything, a pillar of support when I needed it most, but I knew it was time for me to move on, to allow her space and freedom without my constant presence. As Sean and his fiancée laid plans for their new home, I found myself getting involved in the design and layout, ensuring it was a place that would feel welcoming and comfortable for all of us. It was invigorating to think about room placements, decorations, and even garden plans. Sean often joked that it was like having a professional on board, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He was acknowledging my efforts and valuing my opinions. The day we visited the site of our future home, standing on the land that had once been my family home, was poignant. The land had changed owners and soon would transform again under Sean's vision. "This is more than just land," Sean said, squeezing my hand. "It's a foundation for the future. Our future." His words resonated with me, reinforcing my decision to join them. As we watched the early stages of construction, I thought about the cycle of life, how destruction can lead to new beginnings. The house that had been a symbol of family conflict was now the ground on which a new family connection would be built. It felt like a fitting resolution, a way to honor the past while looking forward to the future. During my last night at Amelia's, we sat down for a quiet dinner, reminiscing about the past months and discussing future plans. "You always have a home here, you know," Amelia said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm so happy for you, going to build a new life with Sean and his family." "I'll be just across town," I replied, smiling through the bittersweet feelings. "You're not getting rid of me that easily." The move itself was smooth. Sean and his fiancée made sure everything was perfect for my arrival. As I unpacked my belongings and set them up in my new room, the sense of belonging was overwhelming. It wasn't just the physical space that welcomed me, but the promise of family and connection. That evening, as we sat down for our first dinner together in what would soon be our permanent home, I looked around at the happy faces. I realized that I had found a place where I could be myself, where I could heal and grow. The lessons of the past, particularly my tumultuous relationship with my own mother-in-law, were a constant guide on how I wanted to be with Sean and his future wife. Reflecting on everything, I knew that happiness was not just a destination, but a journey. As I embraced my new family, I was determined to contribute to our home with kindness, respect, and love, values that had been sorely tested but never broken in the past. This wasn't just a new chapter, it was a whole new book, and I was ready to make it a beautiful story.